And then I know lots of you know Peter, our son, came down this weekend. He came down Saturday morning, and he left early this morning because he wanted to get back to his church that starts at 10:30. And anyhow, we had a nice visit.
Yeah.
And so
It's, if you want to talk about things that you see in the ordinary world that are miraculous, Peter is actually appears to have turned a corner and is joining the world that the rest of us inhabit, and it's a good thing. I mean, don't let my words fool you on it. It's a pretty amazing transformation that we're seeing, so that's a good thing.
And thank you, Anita. You were inspiring to him yesterday, so I appreciate that. So we are on the second week of Ruth, and we're doing chapter 2. And remember, Ruth is a Moabite. She's a widow now. She's a daughter-in-law. And the last line in verse 1 said that they, which was her and Naomi, arrived back in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley season. And it's believed that the beginning of the barley season was probably about April. So we are in the beginning of chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a prominent man of noble character from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz.
Yep, we need to stop on this, and I hope you guys don't mind, but there are things that you might miss about the story that wind up helping. Look at that first sentence, that first verse. And it says that Naomi has this relative so it's a relative of her now dead husband. But this is like a line from the narrator. This isn't something where Naomi is telling Ruth anything. This is just a little piece of information stuck at the beginning of this chapter. So if you imagine, if you remember, this story is told orally for so long, this is a thing that gets mentioned that's going to become important, but it's just like a side note. So it just reminds you that she has this relative that's named Boaz, and he's a good man. And then we go on with the story.
And Ruth the Moabites said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the fields and glean heads of grain after someone in whose sight I may find favor." "Go ahead, my daughter," Naomi replied. So do you want to talk about gleaning?
Yeah, sure. So gleaning, it's in the law, it's in the Torah. But what happens is that poor people, and especially widows, when they're out harvesting the grain, they walk along behind the harvesters and pick up pieces that get dropped, pieces that don't wind up making their way into the sheaves. And what you have to know about gleaning, so several things, but it is not a privilege. The landowner can't say, "I'm going to let you glean and I'm not going to let you," or "I'm not going to let anybody glean my field. I'm going to get everything." It is actually a right. People have the right to glean the field. It's in the scriptures that it is a right. And the landowner is not supposed to have his people pick up every single thing. He is supposed to leave some. And out at the margins of the field, they're encouraged to just leave some stalks. The really weird thing about it, or unusual, is that in tough times, when there's less food, when there's, I hate to say a famine, but famine is part of it. But when times are tough, they're actually instructed to leave more and not less. And it's the exact opposite of the way humans tend to think. When times are tough, we give less money to charity because we go, well, I gotta keep more for myself. And that's this is one of the clues that tells you that this faith that we have is different. Because when times are tough and people say, well, I can't afford to help other people because times are hard, it's baked in. It is part of this faith in Yahweh that during those times you actually leave more, and you don't insult them by saying, "Here, I'm leaving this for you," but you gather less and leave more for the gleaners when times are hard.
And when Scott says it's in the scriptures, and I don't have the the exact place, but it's in both Deuteronomy and Leviticus. It actually says this is what God wants us to do.
Yes, yeah.
And it's and someone described this as the God's welfare program, and that it is, and it really, it worked, and it was good.
The people still have to
work.
go work for it. They still have to be a part of it. It's a great system, but the fact that it is a part of it, and other people, other cultures at that time even, would not have understood this. You know, it's just, well, that's just kind of a silly thing to do. It's your grain, you grew it, you planted it, it belongs to you. But not within this, you know, these believers in Yahweh. It's the exact opposite.
One of the things, remember the time of this story, though, was at the time of the judges. And at the time of the judges, people weren't necessarily doing what God had instructed them to do. And so was everybody following the gleaning laws? We don't know, but it.
And we'll get some clues to that here in a bit.
Okay, so Ruth departed and went out into the field and gleaned after the harvesters. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and said to the harvesters, "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they replied. And Boaz asked the foreman of the harvesters.
Hold on a second. Let's stop there. So because this is so rich, and again, I hope you don't mind, but some of these things are really, really revealing. So a gleaner has to try and gather more in a day than they're going to eat in a day. They're actually trying to build up some for the future. Boaz arrives, and she's out there, and Boaz says, "May the Lord be with you," or "May the Lord bless you." And they reply, "May the Lord be with you." This is intended to be conspicuous. The person hearing or reading this story, we talked about the time of the judges when it became very ungodly. It was a very ugly time in the history of Israel. And people did what was right in their own eyes and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And yet Boaz shows up with this greeting. May the Lord bless you, and they say, "May the Lord be with you." We're intended to see that these people are still following Yahweh. These people are still devoted. And it's, I mean, those words are in there for a reason. It says that Ruth chanced upon, or happened upon, the portion of the field that belonged to Boaz. These fields a lot of the time were right together. There wasn't a fence in between. There wasn't a hedgerow. Sometimes there would be some rocks that would delineate the corners. But I spent some time on this, and it would have been absolutely understood to the Jewish mind hearing this, that it says she happened upon the field of Boaz. We're to understand that was not chance. It's the way it's phrased in the Hebrew. Everyone understood that this was God's hand at work. So she happened upon the field that belongs to this guy that was mentioned earlier, this Boaz. And I might as well go ahead and tell you real quick, the name Boaz, so many of these names have meaning. We don't know what Boaz means. People argue about it. The only two times that Boaz is mentioned in the scriptures is this man and Solomon's temple. When he builds the great grand temple, there are two enormous pillars, phenomenally big pillars at the entrance that hold up the temple. One is named Yachim and the other is named Boaz. And that image of the Boaz pillar being the one of the two cornerstones, sort of the parts, the pillars that hold up the temple. We don't know if the name was really his name. So many of these are nicknames. But anyway, there's just some history on that. Only two times is Boaz ever mentioned.
So, and Boaz asked the foreman of the harvesters, "Whose young woman is this?" The foreman answered, "She is the Moabites who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab. She has said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the harvesters.' So she came out and has continued from morning until now, except that she rested a short time in the shelter.
And once again, you would think there's not that much there, but Boaz shows up, the owner shows up, and he sees her, and I think people argue about this too, but I think he looked and saw her and said, who is that? Who's that girl? But the word he uses, nara, is someone, it's a woman who is under someone else's care. You know, a lot of the time it's a woman who still lives at home, a young woman who still lives at home and is under her father's care. Someone's keeping an eye on her. It's not a word you would use for a widow. It would be a totally different word. So he sees her as a young woman, but he assumes he doesn't know about her at this time. And so the word is very conspicuous again, that he thinks this is somebody out there or somebody nearby is keeping an eye on her. And they say this is the Moabitess that came back with Naomi from Moab. I think that's a little redundant, but she came back and everyone knows the story. And that's the way of these communities, is that word gets around. They all know each other's business. And they've heard that this young woman has come back with her mother-in-law, left the home of her mother and father, everyone she knows, and she's come to a place where she doesn't know anybody, but she did it to look out for the mother-in-law, the mother of her dead husband. And it's an admirable thing, and word has gotten around. And I feel like to me, it's pretty obvious that word has gotten around too, that she said, your God will be my God. She is referred to numerous times as a Moabite. And yet there's something about the way they refer to her. There is some admiration. And they also say she showed up here to glean, and she worked all day long. She only took one brief rest in the shelter. But here's one last thing, and I'm sorry, but it's important to know. It says that she came up asking to glean among the sheaves. And sheaves are grain that's been bundled up and tied off, and it's already been harvested. Nobody gleans among the sheaves. And it bothered me because she wouldn't have been that audacious to say, hey, do you mind if I just come up with the stuff you've already harvested and tied up and take some of it? She wouldn't have asked that. Well, what I've learned is that Hebrew has no vowels. All right, the ancient Hebrew, the time from this time, there are no vowels. And so you kind of have to supply your own. Up until, later on, they started putting some marks. But there are two words, mirim and marim. And mirim means stalks. Marim means the sheaves. And with no vowels, I think somebody just translated this as sheaves. I mean, what she's saying is, can I come up among the stalks, what's left behind, and glean? And she doesn't know that it's her right, but she asks for permission. And if she can come up and pick up stuff among the leftover stubble, and of course they say yes. And we're going to see in a minute a clue that she has not been going up to the actual sheaves and taking grain that's already been harvested.
Verse 9, then Boaz said to Ruth, listen, my daughter, do not go and glean in another field, and do not go away from this place, but stay here close to my servant girls. Let your eyes be on the field they are harvesting, and follow along after these girls. Indeed, I have ordered the young men not to touch you, and when you are thirsty, go and drink from the jars the young men have filled. At this, she fell on her face, bowing low to the ground, and said to him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, even though I'm a foreigner? Boaz replied, I have been made fully aware of all you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and the land of your birth, and how you came to a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay your work, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge. My Lord, she said, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, for you have comforted and spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your servant girls.
Once again, there's just so much. But he tells her, what was the first thing about she can glean?
First of all, he calls her daughter, so he knows that she's younger, doesn't mean.
Yep.
And you may stay here and glean.
Yeah, and you see where he says, I instructed the young men not to touch you. These women who are out in the field unattended, that's why he refers to her as Nara. He knows it's not one of his servant girls who's out there, because everyone would have understood, you stay away from them. But these unprotected women fall prey. They're vulnerable. And he refers to her, he says, my daughter, and he's letting everyone know, but he says, listen, don't go anyplace else. Stay here in my portion. Stay here in my field. The barley harvest, when the barley harvest begins to wind down, the wheat harvest begins to ramp up. So he's telling her, you've got a safe place here for months, probably at least 2-3 months. Don't go to any place where you might be vulnerable. I've given instructions that nobody's supposed to mess with you here. Follow my servant girls, and this is a different word than Nara, the one he used for her the first time. His servant girls, follow them because they know where my field ends and the next field begins. Stick with them. They'll keep you here or keep you around in my fields, and you'll be safe. And it is a fabulous gesture. And she, of course, says, why would you do this for me? I'm a foreigner. This awareness that even though she's with Naomi, she's still different from them. It's not an insult. It is just a way of life. And he said, I heard what you did for your mother-in-law, and you can tell he admires it. It's a thing that he's touched by, and he says, you're fine. Just stay here, and you'll be safe.
And then
and then the last part about this one. I'm sorry, but he tells her that the Lord.
May the Lord repay your work, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge.
May Adonai repay your work, meaning what she did for her mother, has done for her mother-in-law, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, under whose wings you've taken refuge. And there's an image here, and it's going to become important later in the story. But the word is kanaf. Kanaph, kanaf. And this is a beautiful part of this story. And the image is of a mother bird that puts her wings over the chicks to protect them, all right? And he's telling her, you've come to this place where you know nobody, but this is a place where the God of the universe, where Yahweh, Adonai, looks out for his people. And so may the Lord give you a rich blessing. And you want to read it again exactly?
Sure. May the Lord repay your work, and may you receive a rich reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge.
Under whose kanaf you have taken refuge. And he has given her this vision, this image of being under the protective wings, like a mother chicken or whatever, would protect her young by putting them under her wings. And this is going to become a big issue in the next chapter, so keep that in mind. But I love that word kanaf.
He doesn't say under my wing.
That's true. And you're right, he doesn't say under my wing. Boaz makes it clear, and that's a clue. You're right, Gene, it's a clue to who Boaz is, because he's acknowledging, I'm here doing the will of Yahweh. And it's Yahweh who looks out for his people, and you've come under his protection. It just happens I'm the one doing it. Yeah, that's a good point.
But at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread, and dip it into the vinegar sauce. So she sat down beside the harvesters, and he offered her roasted grain. And she ate and was satisfied and had some left over. So,
We just got another prayer request, so pardon me. That's, yeah, so not only does he, and
so it's mealtime, and he came over, and first of all, he told her to dip her bread and dip it into the vinegar sauce. Oh, that vinegar sauce is an interesting
at the
word.
time of eating, so it's just, mealtime, everybody gets to, eats at the same time. And he invites her over to where he is and offers her to dip her bread in this, it's a sort of a vinegar type thing that gives better taste to dry bread. The people who glean don't have access to that. The people who harvest get extra food that, he feeds them as well as pays them for the day. And he invites her specifically to dip her bread. This is an act of kindness. This is, by the way, hesed. You remember last week what I told you about the word hesed? This is the kind of unlooked for kindness with no hope of return. This is hesed. And he gives her parched grain, roasted grain. That's usually given to the people who are being paid to harvest. It's never given to the people who glean. And it's an amazing gesture. And it says she gets enough to satisfy her, and then she holds some back. She has some left over. And you see her stuffing it in a pocket or something. I assume she's probably going to take it home to Naomi. But the fact is, like I said, a gleaner has to try and gather enough food for more than one day. So this is like a bonus for her. And it would be like I said, like you see somebody at a restaurant grab some food and stuff it in their pocket. And we're supposed to see that image of where she is, of the kindness bestowed by Boaz, but also how desperate she is.
Tell them what the word vinegar sauce is in Hebrew. This is just an interesting side.
And I can't find so far. All I know is that vinegar sauce is called hometz. And I think it must be the same root word from what we call hummus. It's a dip. And a lot of these words share common roots. And so the hometz, when we were in Israel, the way they say hummus sounds just like that. Now, this isn't hummus. This isn't made out of chickpeas. But the idea is they put hummus on everything. You go to McDonald's and they say you want everything on it. That includes hummus. But this habit of dipping the bread into something is just, dry bread isn't that great. And she's dipping it in something called hummus.
And when we say bread, we're not talking about butter crust bread. We're talking about a tortilla-like dry bread.
Probably more like naan or something like that. Yeah. And it does. It doesn't age well. When we lived there, one of the things we found is we're really spoiled by having preservatives in our bread. There, the bread gets 2.5 days old and it's green. And so I told Mary we always say we don't want preservatives, and we were over there and I said I would kill for some preservatives right now because you have to keep up with your daily bread.
Verse 15, when Ruth got up to glean, Boaz ordered his young men, even if she gathers among the sheaves, do not insult her. Rather, pull out for her some stalks from the bundles and leave them for her to gather. Do not rebuke her. So Ruth gleaned grain in the field until evening, and when she beat out what she had gleaned, it was about an ephah of barley. She picked up the grain and went into the town where her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought out what she had saved from her meal and gave it to Naomi. I'll stop there.
Yep. So after she gets up from this meal and goes back, he doesn't do this in front of her. And it would be sort of insulting, He waits until she's walked away and he tells the young men, don't you mess with her. Don't give her a hard time. And that's when he tells them, even if she were to come up and glean from the sheaves themselves. That's part of how I'm so sure that first reference was not her saying, hey, can I come up and steal some stalks out of your bundles? She wouldn't have done that. But he tells them, even if she does that, don't rebuke her. Don't give her a hard time. He says, in fact, when you think about it, pull a few stalks out of the bundles and leave them laying there for her. All right. Now, again, she probably would be a little insulted if she knew that. So he does it discreetly. But he tells them, you watch out for her. At the end of the day, she goes home, and this ephah of barley, the best I can tell, is probably about the equivalent of a 5-gallon bucket full. That's a pretty good load of little barley seeds. And she goes back and she takes it and the leftover parched grain and gives that to Naomi.
Verse 19, then her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? And where did you work? Blessed be the man who noticed you. So she told her mother-in-law where she had worked. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. Then Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness from the living or the dead. Naomi continued, this man is a close relative. He is one of our Kinsman Redeemers.
Okay, so Naomi sees her come home with this much grain. You know, the 5-gallon bucket full of gleaned is quite a haul. And then she's got this roasted grain. That's not supposed to happen. Naomi is wise enough to say, something's going on here. Whose field did you go to? What happened here? And she said, I met this guy named Boaz, and he was kind to me. Naomi instantly recognizes what has happened here. We've talked before about levirate marriage, where if the husband dies and has no children, has no male heir, the next son in line, the brother, is supposed to take this woman as his wife. And the firstborn child, the firstborn son, becomes the heir to the dead brother. Literally is recognized as being the son of the dead brother. And that's how it's supposed to work. A lot of the time, and there are some stories, if we have time, I'll talk about one, but a lot of the time, these guys don't want to take that duty. They don't want to have their firstborn son belong to someone else.
That's dead.
That's dead. And so they refuse, and they're not supposed to do that. But the word for this, Goel, the kinsman redeemer, is more than just the marriage. If you have somebody who's a really bad businessman, or maybe he's a gambler, for instance, and he gambles away and gets into debt and has no choice but to sell his land. This land is sacred. The way they look at it, the land really belongs to God, and he has bestowed it on us. And they're never supposed to let the land get outside the family. But if somebody gets himself into financial trouble and has to sell his land, the nearest kinsman is called a Goel, a kinsman redeemer, and he has a right. He has a right to go to the person who bought the land and pay for it and take it back for the family. That's the same thing they're doing with the levirate marriage, is they're keeping the family line going. So this Goel, not only is there this idea of the marriage of the widow, but it's also the land, the inheritance. The Goel has the right to purchase the land to be sure that it doesn't fall outside the family. And Naomi hears this name, Boaz, and she said, blessed be God whose kindness. That word is hesed. Blessed be the Lord whose hesed has, extended to the, you want to read it again for me?
Sure. May he be blessed by the Lord, who has not withdrawn his kindness from the living or the dead.
So Naomi sees, as I told you before, she sees God's hand in this. She doesn't see it as a chance meeting that Ruth finds her way to Boaz. Blessed be the Lord who has extended his, or has not withheld his kindness from the living or the dead. Boaz is a relative of her dead husband. And that makes him a Goel. That makes him a kinsman redeemer. And she sees God's hand in this. She sees what he's done for Ruth. And she says, God's has said has not been withheld because he has sent this man to be good to us. The living and the dead, of course, Naomi and Ruth are the living, but it's also the Goel, the kinsman redeemer of her dead husband Elimelech. So is that the picture?
Yeah, and the other thing, remember in chapter 1, when Naomi came back and she says, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Mara, because I'm bitter. It seems a lesson for us. We can be bitter sometimes, but she now sees God's hand again.
I think that's a good point. We find ourselves in these places of being bitter, of life turns against us, and we decide God has turned his face from us. And then later on, we see, this evidence that he hasn't left us. And that's where Naomi is. She suddenly realized God has extended his has said to the living and the dead, even now, even after all of this.
So the word Goel, El meaning God?
I wish I could tell you for sure. I don't know. And it's been a hard thing to find out. Probably it's El, the El part is God, but I don't know for sure.
Verse 21, then Ruth the Moabitess said, he also told me, stay with my young men until they have finished gathering all my harvest. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, Ruth, my daughter, it is good for you to work with his young women, so that nothing will happen to you in another field. So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean grain until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
So there's some stuff in here that I know it means something and I don't always know what, but Naomi tells her this, what he tells her about staying with his servant girls, and it's a different word than that narah. His servant girls, it's good that you stay with them because you'll be safe. And what we see in this, when we said last week, this is a story of women about women, you see the vulnerability. You see how badly things could turn. And Naomi is very happy. She says, you've come to exactly the right place. Do what he says and stick with them. And it says that she stayed with Boaz's servant girls through the barley and then the wheat harvest. She stays there for months.
And the Midrash does say, Midrash is an outline of what Jewish rabbis thought. They said that the barley, I looked it up, barley and the wheat season were probably together about 3 months.
Yeah.
So it was 3 months that she did this.
And don't get me wrong, this is not supposed to happen, where these women are vulnerable, where, the men in the field will put their hands on them, is what it says. That's not supposed to happen, but it does. And in this time, the time of the judges, I suspect that around the nation, it probably happens quite a lot.
We're going to start chapter 3 now, and when you read commentaries or hear sermons on the book of Ruth, oftentimes it's called a great love story. So this next chapter, Scott and I talked about whether this is a love story.
It's a love story.
Can you tell me a little bit about how somebody like Naomi would identify, Ruth would identify a field that belonged to different individuals? This one says it happened, but Naomi knows who her kinman is.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, I don't know whether it was accident or God driven. She implies that at the very end of this chapter. How would anybody know? She wouldn't be trespassing, I don't guess.
No. First of all, she has, as I said, she has the right to glean. It is a right, not a privilege.
On anybody's field?
On anybody's field, they can wander as they choose. Any place where there's harvesting, they can go along and glean behind the harvesters. It's a right in the Torah. It's God's law that says that they're permitted to do that. But as what I was trying to say before, is that the land, they don't put up fences, so the fields run together. The servant girls would know Boaz's land. They're from there. Ruth couldn't possibly know it. And the idea that it's no accident absolutely was understood by Naomi. It's supposed to be understood by anyone who hears the story, but we're so far removed that we don't do that. But the people that heard this story orally, the people who read it, all understood we're supposed to get, this is no accident that she meandered around and found her way specifically to this field belonging to Boaz. Remember back at 2, where I told you there's this little narrative piece that says Naomi had a relative named, at that point, that word, Korah, is a relative. It's not a Goel. It just says that she has a relative. And so at that part of the story, we're not supposed to think of him as a kinsman redeemer. It just says, oh, by the way, Naomi has this relative out here named Boaz, and he's a really good guy, and you'll hear more about him later. But he's just a relative until she comes home, and Naomi, then they talk about it. And Naomi says, this is one of our kinsman redeemers. And it's good to take note of the fact that she says it's our kinsman redeemer, mine and yours. This is the relationship, the bond is that even though she's a foreigner, even though she's a Moabite, she's now one of us. So he's your kinsman redeemer, Ruth, as well as mine. He's a relative of Elimelech, but he's become your Goel, your kinsman redeemer.
And just one of them. So she also knows that there's more than one.
There can be, in fact, there are. It'll kind of go through the nearest relative, and if he doesn't take up the duty, the next one has that opportunity.
So,
When Ruth confesses that wherever you go, your faith is my faith, my
Yes.
God. That is a private statement. It's not a Jewish welcome to the religion.
No, that is purely Ruth's doing. It is an amazing utterance by this Moabite woman. She has declared this bond with Naomi, but I mentioned it last week, and maybe it's worth repeating. How does she get to be part of the family? How does she become essentially a Jew? And they have all sorts of rules for becoming part of the faith. And you memorize this and you do this and the men get circumcised. Ruth becomes a Jew. She becomes one of them by her act of declaring it. She becomes a Jew because she says so. And ultimately, it is that proclamation. It is that, I hate to say faith, but it is that declaration of saying, I choose this. And that's good enough. And it's good enough in the sight of God. And it is one of the things that we see, the relationship between Gentiles who choose to follow Yahweh and the Jews who are the sons of Abraham. It has been present since all the way back. It wasn't something that Jesus invented on the spot. This has been baked into God's plan from the beginning. They choose to ignore it sometimes. They get so proud that they say, we're better than those people. There's that part in Isaiah where they're told that God tells them, my house is to be a house of prayer for all people. And thanks for bringing this up. I hope you don't mind the digression, but it's important to understand. I keep coming back to that place in Isaiah where he says, to the eunuch who keeps my Sabbaths, I will give an inheritance greater than sons or daughters. And what we're seeing here is, even though, that was about a eunuch, but it also says to the foreigner, to the sojourner. I will give you a place in my house. This is a house of prayer for all people. And this is what we see with Ruth. She's an outsider, but all she really ever had to do was say, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. And in this story, what we see is that's enough. That's all it was ever intended to be. Now, they were given in the law some things to do, because it's good that you understand everything that's involved in worshiping Yahweh. You understand the precepts, but it's not a prerequisite for being numbered among his people.
So the two things we walked away with this week, this idea that Gentiles were supposed to be part of this plan way back in the Old Testament. It wasn't just when Paul decided it was time to bring in Gentiles. It was way back. And the other thing is, we always talk about Jesus' ministry of turning up the world upside down and doing things that were unexpected. When you think about it, this whole idea of gleaning, this idea of even when there was a famine or when the crops were not as good, then you should give away more of your field to the people that needed it.
And not less.
That was upside down too. So this upside down, Jesus definitely taught that, but Jesus came to taught that because we missed it thousands of years before.
When he says he didn't come to destroy the law, he came to fulfill the law. This is the kind of stuff he's talking about. And this hesed, this grace that gets bestowed, and like Naomi says, God hasn't withheld his hesed. She sees this act by Boaz as being absolutely an act by Yahweh of bestowing this hesed on these two widows.
Chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek a resting place for you that it may be well with you? Now, is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been working, a relative of ours? In fact, tonight he is winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Therefore, wash yourself, put on perfume, and wear your best clothes. Go down to the threshing floor, but do not let the man know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies, then go in and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will explain to you what you should do."
Let's stop there once again. It's another one of these things. So this is exactly what it looks like. We read commentaries a lot to prepare for this, and there are a lot of people who want to try and, in their mind, sanitize this. Oh, it's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. It's very, very practical, and I hope some of you remember a song from like the late 70s.
It was later than that.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Here's your one chance, fancy, don't let me down. It's about this mother and her daughter, and they're alone, and they're desperate, and she goes and spends the last of their money on a fancy dress. And says, you go out and meet a rich man, and that's your only chance. And Naomi realizes that like she said before, she's got no younger sons. There's no one to even take care of her, much less Ruth. And Ruth is young. She's going to have an entire long life of being alone and destitute. And she says, isn't it right that I should find a resting place for you, that I should make sure that you're taken care of? I won't be around forever, and frankly, I don't have much to offer. So she says, you know that this Boaz guy whose fields you've been gleaning in is a Goel. He's a Kinsman Redeemer. And by now they understand what that means. She says, go put on a nice dress. You know,
Wash
she
yourself,
probably got
put
to
on perfume.
Put on perfume and go down, and she knows that Boaz is going to be down at the threshing floor. So
Explain the threshing floor and winnowing.
they actually build a place. A lot of the time it'll be just a shallow pit, but to separate the grain from the chaff, from the undesirable husks and everything, they toss it up in the air, and the wind blows off the lightweight stuff, the chaff, and the grain is heavy and comes back down. And in this time of the judges, we see from Gideon that the Amalekites and the other ones whose name I'm not getting, they would wait until they see the dust cloud and come riding in and steal their grain. So they literally started doing this down in these depressions. But Naomi has done her homework, and she knows that Boaz is going to be down winnowing the grain that evening, cleaning it up. So this is a plan, and it is exactly what it looks like. She is telling her, you're going to go down and entice Boaz, and you're going to declare yourself as the for the levirate marriage, but you're going to look good doing it. I mean, you're going to make it easy on him. So you're going to clean up, dress up, and put on perfume. And don't go down and tell him, I'm here, wait until he's done, and then he's had stuff to eat and to drink, and he's feeling better, and then go to him. And actually, she says, when he lays down there at the threshing floor, and he's not going to leave this grain that's ready to go. He's going to stay there and guard it. So he's going to lay down there on the threshing floor. There are no light bulbs. So when she says, take note of where he lays down, it's because it's going to be dark. And then go and uncover his feet. And some people say that's probably more than just his feet. I don't know. But lay down at his feet. And this is a declaration. She is saying, I am offering myself to you. It is exactly what it looks like.
And it isn't a wedding dress she has on.
Oh, yeah. We actually read commentaries where they are so afraid that we don't want to celebrate an unvirtuous woman. And they're so afraid of this that they say this dress, the name that they use, is actually a wedding dress. It's not a wedding dress, okay? It's just not. She is designed to go in and dress up and look good for Boaz.
I will do everything you say, Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law had instructed her to do.
That's real quick right there, because I'll forget it going back. It's like that song, go find this rich man. And Ruth doesn't question. Ruth knows what she's being instructed to do. And she did it all, just like Naomi said, and went down to the threshing floor and did everything Naomi instructed. It's an amazing, the devotion to Naomi, to say, Naomi is telling her, you're going to go get yourself a husband. And Ruth says, okay. She doesn't say, well, the guy's like almost your age. She just goes and does what Naomi tells her. It is an amazing act.
And that's a good point. Although we don't know anybody's age, we can assume that Ruth is young, and Boaz, it's not like he's ancient, but he is at least a generation older.
Middle-aged.
Middle-aged.
Yeah.
Okay. After Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then Ruth went in secretly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. At midnight, Boaz was startled, turned over, and there lying at his feet was a woman.
Hold on just a second, one more, because you lose these things. I love the way, and if you look in, especially if you've got the Berean, I love the way it says this. At midnight, Boaz was startled, turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman! Exclamation point. I mean, and that's the way it's written up in the Hebrew too. I mean, this is this startling thing to him, and there's a woman at his feet, and for a good Jewish man, that's, maybe problematic.
Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she replied. Spread the corner of your garment over me, for you are a kinsman redeemer.
Now we come back to it. You remember back in that last chapter where Boaz describes her as coming under the wings, the protective wings of God, kanaf. This is the same word. She tells him to spread the corner of his cloak, and that word is kanaf. And the imagery that is here is intended to be exactly the same. And it is Boaz spreading the corner of his garment, his kanaf, over her, but we're also supposed to see in that same protective embrace of Yahweh. And so literally what it says in the Hebrew is, spread the corner of your kanaf over me. And it's the same image that Boaz gave her in the last chapter for coming under the wings of God.
I'm not picking up any hanky-panky in this so far. She goes and follows mother-in-law. Boaz is a serious man, prominent man, noble man. I don't think he's going to try to do any hanky-panky with her until all the requirements are reached. Are the commentaries suggesting that they had one hell of a night?
Well, no, I mean, there are commentaries that'll tell you nearly anything. I mean, people love to come up with something different. But the fact is that just for her to be there, uncovering, it says his feet, and the way it's worded, it's probably at least up to but it's probably scandalous if someone finds out. But as far as and I'm glad someone had the courage to ask this, because it is understood that what she is offering is to be a wife. And it is understood everything that goes with that, okay? In fact, because you understand that the Goel, the firstborn son, they're going to have a child. Now, is there an indication that anything happens there on the threshing floor? The opposite, and we'll get to it in the next few verses. But the undercurrent, is that what is being presented? Absolutely, make no mistake. The difference is they're just not squeamish about it. They understand that, we think of this whole thing of levirate marriage as being weird. The brother goes in and becomes the husband to the wife and has a child with his brother's widow. We think of that as weird.
And then that child is like
is
the dead man's child.
And so you have to stretch a little bit. But what you see in this story is they're not the least bit squeamish about what's going on here. And there is no gray area about what she's offering. Okay? None. We'll see in a few verses, there's an indication that there was nothing going on this time on the threshing floor. But it's understood that is part of the offer.
I also found it interesting that the book says, uncover his feet.
Yes.
When you got a cloak, or out in the woods, your feet are the last thing to be covered. You normally say, go cover his feet.
Yeah. It is, this kanaf is a cloak. It's a longer garment. But it's I think it's probably true that uncover his feet is sort of a euphemism. Okay? It's more than just his feet. And how much is none of my business. I don't care. But I think it is intended for people who are not, trying to be squeamish about this, the entire, picture that's being offered here. She's saying, I'm here to offer to become a wife.
Then Boaz said, may the Lord bless you, my daughter. You have shown more kindness now than before, because you have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, do not be afraid, my daughter. I will do for you whatever you request, since all my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Yes, it is true that I am a kinsman redeemer, but there is a redeemer nearer than I. Stay here tonight, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem you, good, let him redeem you. But if he does not want to redeem you, as surely as the Lord lives, I will. Now lie here until morning.
So, bless you, my daughter, for you have shown more hesed. This, once again, this kindness, you have shown hesed. You didn't run off after the young men, and you could have. As a young widow, she could have found another young man in town and someone who wanted to marry her and become his wife, and it would be someone her age. She was perfectly entitled to do it. And instead of running off after the young men, you think what he's saying is just that you've chosen an old guy like me. But what you have to understand is, he's the kinsman redeemer. He is the relative of Elimelech. That's Naomi's husband. If Ruth goes off and finds a young man and marries him, Naomi is left on her own. Because if she marries someone else, he's not a kinsman of Naomi. He has no obligation. There's no hint that he needs to take care of her mother-in-law,
And that other guy wouldn't get their land
her
either.
former mother-in-law. That's true. But he's saying, you haven't run off after these young men. You stayed true to your character and he says, I'm going to do for you what you ask. I absolutely will, because everyone in the village, everyone in the town knows that you are a woman of noble character. And what she's done by choosing this older man, she's chosen the Kinsman Redeemer. She's chosen the Goel. And that also means that Naomi is supposed to be taken care of in this as well. And it is. It's a tremendous story. What she's done here is the things that human beings, we have to worry about. We go, well, I'd like to do this, but if I do this, then what about Naomi? And those of us who think this way, you always have to balance that. You always have to say, I can't do everything I want to do when I want to do it, because there are other people involved. And that's what Boaz is acknowledging. And he says,
And then the other thing Boaz says, well, I only have a couple of minutes, but Boaz says, but there's another Kinsman Redeemer. So to me, he's like, he was already been checking this out, is what my thought is.
I agree with you. I think you see that Naomi had a plan, but you also see Boaz has considered this possibility because he's researched and he knows there's a nearer relative. There's another Goel who is closer in line than me. And he says, I have no choice. I've got to go to this guy. He says, don't worry about a thing. I'm going to do what you ask. But if he chooses to play the Goel, if he chooses to be the Redeemer, that's his right. And that's good, because at least then you and Naomi will be taken care of. But if he doesn't, I'm going to do exactly what you ask. And instead of sending her home, he says, stay here with me.
I'm going to read this last, just 14. So she lay down at his feet until morning, but she got up before anyone else could recognize her.
So,
And I'll stop there.
is there anything, and I'll put in quotes, wrong with what they're doing and what they've done? And the answer is no. And yet, she got up early in the morning before anybody, when it's still dark enough, nobody would recognize that she's there, because she knows what people will think. She knows that tongues will start wagging. And people, we love to judge. We judge thousands of years after the fact. We look back and want to judge people. And it's actually baked into the story. He tells her, stay here with me, but at the same time, she gets up before anybody could possibly see, and tongues start wagging.
And he's going to tell her something, and we'll take that up next week, because we are.
Next week it is. We have 2 more prayer requests. Karen Ernst says her aunt is prepping for heart surgery now. And I don't have a name. Please keep her in your prayers. And then V said that her son is about to deploy again. V, how long? Well, you can't talk to me. This happens, and it's always a worry. It's always a concern. And so keep V's son here. Are you coming off of mute? No? Keep V's son in your prayers, and V.
Yes, thank you. He's not going to be there long. And of course, in special forces, he's just doing training. So we don't know.
You never know. And that's always worse, the not knowing. And you've done this, you've told us this before, and you don't always even know where he's going. You just know he's deploying, right?
Right. We know he's in Europe. No, we don't yet.
What's his name?
His name is Samuel.
Samuel. Let's.
He needs to go south.
God, you know our hearts, and you see in these requests the heart of your people. The concern that we have for each other and the concern we have for these people that we love. Karen's aunt, but the whole family as they wait with the not knowing. And V and her son Samuel, the deployment, the worry about that is a big thing, but the families who wait and don't know, God, be with us. Be with these two and the two families. Be with us as we look for your hand at the times that we feel like you've turned your face from us, to see these places where we recognize that you're with us and remind us to draw close to you. Amen.
You guys can unmute yourselves. Thank you, guys. I hope you guys have a good week. And where you are, I hope there's sun, because it's pretty here again.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
You're
Have a great
welcome.
week.
Bye-bye. See you guys later.
I need to have that picture of